Imagine a world where towering stone walls rise against the sky, where the clang of metal echoes through ancient courtyards, where banners flap in the wind above drawbridges and moats. A world where power is measured not by wealth alone, but by the strength of your fortress. This was the world of castles. For centuries, castles were more than just homes for the nobility. They were symbols of dominance, centers of strategy, and fortresses of survival. Their stones carry stories of conquest, betrayal, endurance, and ambition. Their very foundations speak of a time when life and death often depended on how high you could build your walls and how well you could defend them. The first castles, as we know them, began appearing in Europe during the 9th and 10th centuries. After the fall of the Roman Empire, Europe fractured into countless feuding territories. Lords, kings, and warlords scrambled to control land, and chaos reigned. In this volatile environment, protection was paramount. Early castles were simple motte-and-baileys structures, wooden keeps atop raised earth mounds with enclosed courtyards below. Though primitive, they were effective. A fortified position with a clear view of the surrounding land could repel attacks and assert control. These early castles were not just military outposts, they were the nucleus of power for a feudal lord. Peasants farmed the land around them. Soldiers drilled in their courtyards, and justice was administered from their halls, but wood burns. And those who ruled knew that fire was a weapon as dangerous as any sword. By the 11th century, stone replaced timber. Stone castles were permanent. They projected authority. Their imposing walls, thick towers, and narrow windows were not just defensive features, they were psychological tools. A castle on a hill could dominate an entire valley. To approach it was to understand your place in the social order. Behind those walls were not just weapons, but ideology. Castles said, "This land is claimed. This power is established. You are either with us or against us." Throughout the Middle Ages, castles evolved. Military innovation, economic shifts, and cultural changes transformed their design. The Crusades, in particular, played a major role. As European armies ventured into the Middle East, they encountered formidable fortresses built by Byzantines, Arabs, and Turks. These inspired a new generation of castle construction. Concentric castles, with multiple layers of walls, emerged. No longer was a single wall enough. Layers meant depth. Defense was not a line, it was a zone. The enemy would have to breach one wall, then another, and possibly yet another, all while under attack from above. Architects began to think not only in terms of defense but of deterrence. A good castle was one you never had to defend, because no one dared attack it. Castles became statements of grandeur. Think of the Château de Chambord in France, with its blend of medieval fortification and Renaissance luxury. Or Croc de Chevaliers in Syria, a crusader stronghold so impenetrable that even after centuries, its silhouette remains daunting. These structures were not just homes or fortresses. They were messages carved into stone: we are here. We are strong. We will not be moved. Life inside a castle was both magnificent and brutal. For the nobility, it was a world of feasts, tournaments, and politics. For the servants and soldiers, it was a life of constant work, discipline, and sometimes fear. A castle could become a cage. In times of siege, food would dwindle, disease would spread, and morale could crumble. Siege warfare was a slow, punishing ordeal. Attackers built trebuchets, battering rams, and tunnels to collapse walls from below. Defenders poured boiling oil, launched stones, and shot arrows from slit windows. Victory often came not from strength, but from starvation, yet, despite the suffering, castles endured. They were repaired, expanded, and inherited. They passed from hand to hand in treaties, dowries, and acts of war. They adapted. As gunpowder spread across Europe in the 14th and 15th centuries, the age of traditional castles began to decline. Cannonballs could shatter stone walls. Fortifications had to change. Towers became lower and thicker. Bastions and star-shaped designs emerged. allowing defenders to better repel artillery. The medieval castle was evolving into the modern fortress. But even as their military role faded, their symbolism persisted. Kings and nobles continued to build them, not for protection, but for prestige. Castles were about more than war. They were centers of administration, law, and economic control. From them, taxes were collected, laws were enforced, and rebellions were crushed. They housed courts, treasuries, and prisons. In many ways, castles were the original capitals, microcosms of power. When you entered one, you were entering the heart of a realm. Even peasants, who might never set foot inside, oriented their lives around the castle's rhythm. It dictated trade routes, festivals, markets, and even seasons of planting and harvest, depending on the lord's decree. Across Europe, the style of castles varied. In Scotland and Ireland, rugged tower houses dotted the landscape, sturdy, vertical structures that could be defended by a handful of men. In Germany, hilltop castles loomed over river valleys, controlling vital trade routes. In France, grand chateaux fused luxury with military might. In Spain, the Moorish influence brought elegance to fortification, with the Alhambra standing as a testament to beauty and strength combined. Each region adapted the concept of the castle to its terrain, threats, and culture. Yet all shared the same purpose: to embody power in stone. Castles were also places of imagination. They fueled legends, stories, and fears. Dragons, damsels, knights, ghosts, all are born from the mythos that surrounded these stony titans. Even today, we associate castles with fairy tales and fantasies, their silhouettes etched into our collective subconscious. But behind the romance lies reality. Castles were not always noble. They were often built with forced labor. They housed tyrants as often as they sheltered heroes. They were instruments of oppression as much as protection. Their halls have heard screams and laughter alike. Their dungeons tell darker tales than their ballrooms ever could, yet despite their contradictions, castles remain one of humanity's most powerful symbols. They represent a time when survival depended on strength, when stone and strategy ruled, when the very earth was reshaped to defend a crown. And even now, centuries later, they rise defiantly against the skyline, defying the erosion of time, reminding us that power, once carved in stone, rarely fades without a trace. As the Renaissance dawned, the purpose of castles began to shift. The battlefield was changing. Warfare became more mobile, more strategic, and increasingly driven by firearms and gunpowder. The towering walls that once stood impervious to arrows now crumbled under the relentless blows of cannon fire. But rather than vanish, castles transformed. Many were remodeled into palaces, symbols not just of strength, but of sophistication and cultural refinement. The brutal practicality of medieval fortresses gave way to the elegance of symmetrical courtyards, manicured gardens, and ornate facades. Nobility no longer needed to defend themselves in the same way, but they still needed to display dominance. Architecture evolved, but the psychology of power remained. In England, after the Norman conquest, castles were used to secure the land. William the Conqueror built hundreds across the country to enforce his rule. The White Tower in London, later known as the Tower of London, was both fortress and prison. It held royals and rebels alike, and its cold stone corridors witnessed the rise and fall of dynasties. In France, castles like Carcassonne and Château de Pierrefonds stood as both cultural treasures and military strongholds. In Eastern Europe, vast complexes like Malbork Castle in Poland, built by the Teutonic Knights, served as monastic, military, and administrative centers all in one. Each region infused its own values and fears into the way it built and used these massive structures. Asia, too, developed its own formidable equivalents. In Japan, castles like Himeji and Matsumoto rose during the Sengoku period, a time of near-constant civil war. Unlike their European counterparts, Japanese castles emphasized vertical defense and wooden interiors layered with stone foundations. They were built for quick response, with intricate mazes and traps designed to confuse intruders. They blended military function with aesthetic detail, reflecting the deep influence of Zen, nature, and symbolism. Meanwhile in India, forts like Marangar and Chittorgarh sprawled across cliffs and plateaus, massive in scale and steeped in legend. Their gates were studded with iron spikes to repel war elephants. Their walls curved to deflect cannonballs. These structures remind us that the instinct to defend, to rise above the threat, is universal, but castles were not only shaped by the battlefield. They were shaped by politics. Marriages, inheritances, alliances, all dictated the fate of a fortress. A single stone could outlast 10 generations, but a marriage treaty could change a castle's flag overnight. Betrayals unfolded within their banquet halls. Ambitions were born in their towers. Some castles were abandoned not by siege, but by disinterest. As royal courts moved to cities, rural castles fell silent. Ivy crept over their battlements. Roofs caved in. Ghost stories took the place of guards. And yet, even in ruin, they stood as monuments to a time when stone was strategy. The rise of the nation-state and central governments diminished the need for private fortresses. Monarchs and parliaments demanded control. Private armies became illegal. Fortified independence gave way to collective security, and castles, once seats of defiance, became regulated, tamed, and sometimes demolished. The French Revolution saw many castles destroyed by angry mobs, symbols of the oppression they sought to erase. In other parts of Europe, castles were nationalized. Turned into schools, hospitals, or barracks. Still others were preserved as relics, restored by romanticists and historians who saw in them a window into a past both brutal and majestic. In the 19th century, the Gothic revival breathed new life into castles. Architects across Europe and even in the Americas began building in the style of medieval fortresses, but with modern comforts. These were not fortresses of war, but dreams of what castles once represented. Neuschwanstein in Germany, perhaps the most iconic fairy tale castle in the world, was built not for defense, but for a king's imagination. Ludwig II of Bavaria, obsessed with legends and opera, created a palace that belonged more to myth than reality. Yet it stands, visited by millions, inspiring the likes of Walt Disney and embedding itself into pop culture as the ultimate castle fantasy. Today, castles exist in many states. Some are ruins, windswept and skeletal. Others are museums, echoing with the footsteps of tourists rather than soldiers. Some are still lived in, maintained by noble families or repurposed into luxury hotels. In Ireland and Scotland, you can sleep where knights once plotted and queens once wept. You can dine beneath ceilings that have seen both feasts and famine. These buildings are more than stone and mortar, they are living history. Every crack in a wall, every faded tapestry, every weathered gate holds the memory of centuries. They remind us of the lives lived within, the decisions made that shaped borders and changed empires. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of castles is not in their architecture or even their history. It is in their symbolism. To this day, we build metaphorical castles. We fortify our homes, we speak of strongholds and bastions of freedom, we romanticize the idea of an impregnable sanctuary. In literature, in cinema, in our dreams, castles persist as representations of protection, ambition, love, fear, and resilience. They are where princesses wait, where dragons guard treasure, where the final battle is fought. They are where the human imagination meets the brute reality of survival. Every castle tells a story. Some tell tales of glory, of victories won, of oaths sworn, of lineages preserved. Others tell tales of tragedy, of sieges lost, of betrayals cut deep, of blood spilled in stone courtyards. All tell tales of people. People who dared to carve power out of the earth, who dared to reach for permanence in a world forever changing. People who hid, who ruled, who rebelled, who dreamed. These people, nameless and noble alike, are the true legacy of castles. When you stand before a castle, you are not just looking at history. You are standing on layers of human will, ambition, fear, and hope. You are witnessing the stone echoes of past empires. You are seeing the scars of defense, the flourishes of pride, the mysteries of lives once lived behind those walls. And in that moment, you are part of their story too. Because as long as we remember them, as long as we tell their stories, castles will never truly fall. They will stand, not only on hills and in valleys, but in the collective memory of a species that once believed that with enough stone, enough courage, and enough vision, we could keep the darkness at bay. So the next time you see a castle, whether in person, in a book, or in a dream, know that it is more than just a relic. It is a mirror. A mirror of our fears, our ambitions, and our belief in something enduring. In a world that moves ever faster, castles remind us to pause, to reflect, and to stand strong, even if just for a moment, against the tides of time.